So let's start this chapter called Heredity and Evolution. Here the two terms that we are using, what do they mean? So let's talk about heredity first. Let's start with you only. You do resemble your mom and dad, right? A little bit. This particular thing is called heredity. We can define heredity as the phenomena. Heredity is the phenomena of inheritance of traits or features of parents to offsprings or progeny. See, traits and features are same words. I mean, these are different words having the same meaning. Offsprings mean children. Progeny also means children. So we can define heredity as the phenomena of inheritance of features or traits of parents to offsprings or progeny. When children are born with features resembling that of their parents, then that phenomena is called heredity. Now let's talk about evolution. This photo is about evolution. It tells you about what is evolution. Like, this is telling us about human beings, what we were like before, gradually what changes came, and here you can see finally how we evolved into the present day man. We can define evolution as the process. Evolution is the process of development of new type of living organism from an old one by gradual changes. So evolution is the process of development of new type of living organism, from an old one by gradual changes. This is evolution. Okay. So now we will study heredity and evolution in greater details in this chapter. Before we move ahead with this, let me just inform you that the previous chapter that we studied on reproduction, if you kind of understand that chapter a bit, then it will be easier for you to understand this chapter. Okay, so before we start, I would like to advise you to go through the video of that chapter and revise a bit. Okay, so let's move ahead. Variation during reproduction. So we have seen that there are two ways of reproduction. One is asexual and the other way is sexual way. Asexual way has less variation, and in the sexual way the variation is more variation. This is what we have seen, and for this reason the sexual method of reproduction is considered a little better. This I had told you. But anyway, the main point is that no matter which way reproduction happens, there is bound to be some variations. Like, you can see this picture of an organism in the beginning, and this produces two offsprings. So you can see that this offspring has maximum properties of its parents, right? But you can see here that this one property is different. This property is little different from that of the parents. You can see a bit of variation here. Now the organism we have here, when it will produce offsprings, maximum properties will be same, but there might be some variations. Same way here also there might be some variations. Though you can see here that this one has no variation and it is almost the same. So this diagram that you are seeing gives you the basic funda of heredity and evolution. Okay. Now see, maximum of the properties are transferred from the parents to the offsprings. Maximum properties. So this phenomena is heredity. Okay. Most of its properties are passed on to its child, and most of its properties are passed on to its child. So this is heredity. Now see what happens. Here we have the first generation with us. this one's the second generation, and this one's the third generation. So as and when new generations keep coming up, new changes shall be introduced. That's a fact. So later on, the generation that will come, if we compare that with that of the first generation, we might find notable changes. Notable changes. This is the basic concept of evolution, that in every generation some changes will be introduced. So after millions of years from now, many years from now, there will be a generation which will be very different from that of the first generation. That is what will be called as evolution. Let me just tell you one thing, that the variations that come during reproduction are very important. Even in the reproduction chapter, I had told you this. Now let's recall, why is it important? Tell me, why is it important? You must have remembered, necessary for surviving. For the long-term survival of any organism, this variation is necessary. For example, in the reproduction chapter, I had said, you remember, I had said that bacteria is a microorganism that we all know, okay? And this bacteria is one of the most ancient organism of this earth. It has been here on earth for many years, and over these years there has been many variations in it, which has actually helped in its survival. Let me explain this with the help of an example. So let us assume that this is the earth and there are many bacteria on it, but there isn't any variation in them. They are exactly the same. Okay. They are exactly same. Now, suppose there's a calamity. Suppose an asteroid hits. This might happen. It had happened in the past, and because of this asteroid hitting the Earth's temperature suddenly rises, very high temperature. Now see what happens. Because of this, it becomes difficult for the bacteria to survive in such high temperature. Now if we consider any one bacteria, and if it is unable to survive, then the rest will also not be able to survive, because all of them are exactly the same. But if it succeeds to survive, the rest will also survive. This means what? Either all of them will die, or all of them will survive. Either all dead or all alive. Something like this will happen. If all remain alive, that's fine, but what if they all die? That means bacteria will simply vanish from the face of this earth. Okay, this might happen. It can happen. So chances of elimination. So if there aren't any variations in bacteria, then there is a chance that in case there's a disaster, all bacteria will be finished forever. But this isn't the case, because all bacteria are not obviously alike. We had just considered a hypothetical case. In reality, as I had told you, there will be a variation in reproduction, because of which bacteria are of different types. So some bacteria have been developed in such a way, have developed on earth in such a way that they can withstand very high temperatures, can survive in high temperature. Okay, so because of the years and years of evolution, some bacteria have been developed in such a way that they can survive even in very high temperature. And you can understand that if an asteroid is hitting the earth, then these bacteria will survive, whereas the rest will die. So the whole species of bacteria will not be washed away from the face of this earth. For this reason, variations are important. There's a lot of variations even in human beings. See, some people are very tall, some are short, skin color differs, hair color differs too, hairstyles are even different. And if you notice carefully, then the nose of people, they are also of different types. Now see, what types of nose we have generally. One very important difference that you can notice in people is ears related. This part of the ear is called earlobe. In some people, the earlobe is of this type, and in some, the earlobe is of this type. You have understood the difference? This is attached earlobe. The earlobe is fully attached to the face. And this is called detached earlobe. You can see that this earlobe isn't attached to the face. So human beings have also evolved over the years, and there has been different types of variations in them. So between heredity and evolution, we will first consider heredity in detail. So we have seen that heredity is actually the transfer of features from parents to children. Now, how does this happen? How? That is the question. How traits are transferred? How traits are transferred from parents to offsprings? How do the features of the parents reach their children? See, all the organisms we have are made up of cells. There isn't any doubt. There's nucleus in every cell. Nucleus. Okay. Now this nucleus has thread-like structures in it. Thread-like structures, which are called chromosomes. Chromosomes. I had told you about these somewhere earlier also. Thread-like structures. These chromosomes have DNA in it. And DNAs have genes in them. Genes. These genes are called unity of heredity. Unity of heredity. Unity of heredity. Because these genes are only responsible for transferring the features from the parents to the offsprings. Genes are responsible for inheritance. Genes are responsible for inheritance. We have different genes for different traits. An organism can have different traits, different properties. Now these different properties are decided by the genes. Like, let me tell you, height. Height is an important trait. It's an important property. Some organism might be tall and some short. So how is it decided whether a particular organism will be tall or short? So there are some genes related to height. Those genes decide whether an organism should be tall or short. Let's talk about another trait, complexion. Every organism will have different complexion. Some might be black, some white, can be of different color. So how is this decided? For that also we have genes. Okay. So the genes present in any human being, genes related to complexion, will decide the complexion of that person. Right? Like the shape of nose. Okay. Different people will have different shapes of nose. So how is this decided? So there will be some genes related to nose inside the person which will control the shape of nose of a person. If in any two person the genes related to nose are same, exactly the same, then these two individuals will have same type of nose. But if the nose related genes are different in them, then the shapes of their nose shall be different. Now the next point that I will be talking about, please concentrate on it. Initially it might seem difficult, but you will understand it clearly later on. So the next point is genes work in pairs. The genes that we have work in pairs. How? Let me explain with the help of an example. So let's talk about height. We have already studied that height is controlled by genes. Okay. So height related genes are found in two forms. Two forms. Genes related to height. What forms? One form is called capital T and the other form is called small t. Now this form, the capital T one, is responsible for making the organisms tall, and this form, the small t, is responsible for making the organisms short. Okay. Now, in any organism, there will be height-related genes and there will be two height-related genes. Two genes. There will be height-related two genes. Okay. Now see, if there are two genes, what type of genes they might be? It might happen that the first gene is of capital T and second gene is also of capital T. There will be two genes and they can be of any forms. So both the first and the second gene might be of capital T form. It might also happen that is the first gene is of capital T form and the second gene is of small t. Or it might also happen that the first gene is small and the second one is capital. You must have understood that both the genes can also be of small t form. So we are discussing about the height of an organism there will be two height-related genes. Either both the genes will be responsible for making one tall, or both will be responsible for making one short, or one responsible for making tall and the other responsible for making short. Now see, if the situation is that in an organism both the genes are of capital T, okay, then both would work towards making the organism tall. So you must have understood that the organism would be tall. In this case, both the genes would work towards making one short. Then the organism will be short. Okay. Now what happens in these two cases? When one gene wants to make it tall and the other one short, what happens in this case? So see, even in this case, it is observed that the organism is tall. You might find this a little surprising. See, what happens is, there are two categories of genes. So we have capital T and small t. Out of these two forms, one would be the dominant gene. And the other form is recessive gene. So here, the tall one is the dominant gene and the short one is the recessive gene. So, if both the genes are found in an organism, the properties of the dominant gene will be visible. This is why it is called dominant. The properties of the dominant gene will be visible. So it's quite simple. Actually, if both are the tall, then it will be tall. If both are short, then it will be short. But if both the types of genes are present, then the organism will inherit the properties of the dominant gene. Here, we also use some different terms. This one that we have here, this one. How these genes are in the organism. When we talk about this is called genotype. Means gene pattern. This means gene pattern. What are the patterns of the gene? What forms do we get? And whether the organism appears tall or short is called phenotype. Phenotype means what properties are visible in an organism. What properties are seen in an organism? Property shown in organism. We will see some more examples to understand this better, but first let us write down some more definitions. What is dominant gene? Genes which decides traits. Genes which decides traits in presence of the different genes is called the dominant gene. Okay, see here, the capital T was the dominant gene because this was deciding the property in presence of another different gene. Okay, recessive gene can be defined as a gene which decides traits in presence of other identical genes. Genes that decide traits in presence of other identical genes. So here, the small t is the recessive gene, because it is being able to decide the trait only in the presence of another identical gene. Okay? Okay, right. Another thing that you will notice is that the dominant gene is denoted by capital letter and the recessive gene is denoted by small letter, which you can see here in this case. Okay, let's take another example of the color of hair. Color of hair. We generally get two types of hair color in human beings. Either hair is black or blonde, which is also obviously decided by a gene. So to decide the color of hair, we have genes which are of two forms. One of these forms is denoted by capital H and the other one is by small h. This capital H form is responsible for making the hair black, and this small h is responsible for making the hair color blonde. Okay, so now tell me, out of these, which one is the dominant form and which one is the recessive gene? Which one is the dominant and which one is the recessive? So students, you must have understood that a capital H form is the dominant form, right? And the small h form is the recessive form. And how did you understand this? Just now I had told you that the dominant gene is always denoted by capital letter and the recessive gene is denoted by small letter. So now you will answer a small question of mine. Now see, I have made these three genotypes. What is genotype? Pattern of genes. Okay. So there must be someone having both capital H type genes In some, both small h types genes and some one capital H and one H. You need to tell me the phenotypes of this. Phenotypes. That means you need to tell me the type of their hair color. So you must be thinking, have you thought it already? It's very easy. You just have to keep in mind that this one is dominating one and this is the recessive one. So let me tell you the answer. This is the answer. So there's no doubt here. Both the genes are trying to make the hair color type black. So it is black. There's no doubt here also that these two genes forms will try to make the hair blonde. So it's blonde. This might be a bit confusing since one is capital H, which will try to make it black, and the small h will try to make it blonde. But the capital H gene is the dominant one. This is the dominant, so it will dominate, and thus the hair will be black. So we have got our phenotypes. What is meant by phenotypes? It is that the trait or feature shown by the organism. Answer me another question. Now tell me what will be the genotype of this lady. You need to tell me the genotype of this lady and also the genotype of this lady, hair related. So it's very simple. This lady here has blonde hair, blonde, okay? Which is because of this small h gene. So obviously both the genes in this case is of small h type, okay? Which is because of this small h gene. So this is her genotype. This lady has black hair, so what might be her genotype? You must have already thought it might be this, or it can be this also, okay? One small h and one capital H. Since capital H is the dominating one, so it will dominate and make the hair color black. Or its genotype might also be H followed by capital H, right? But this lady here, her genotype will surely be this, both small h. Now let's see one more interesting thing, that when these ladies will have their offsprings, then how will their hair color will be? Let's have a look. Let's take this example in order to understand. This lady and this male together reproduce, okay? So this lady has blonde hair. So tell me her genotype. What will be her genotype? Her genotype is definitely HH. And the genotype of this male, let us assume, is capital H, okay? Though this male might also have this type of genotype. Since this capital H is the dominating one, so it will make the hair black. But for the time being, let us assume that this male has this genotype and the female has this genotype. Now, how will reproduction take place between them? How? Try and remember that there are sex cells in female and there are sex cells in male also. Now, one sex cell from each male and female comes. Sex cells, okay? In humans, the female sex cell is called ova and the sex cell in male is called sperm, okay? So these two will come together and fuse into a different cell that is called zygote. Now when this zygote grows, it develops into children. Now see what happens. This sex cell, like the female sex cell ova, will have any one out of these two genes, right? Any one out of these two. Any one out of these two genes means that it must be the H gene, right? Similarly, the male sex cell will also have any one out of these two genes. That means it will be a single H. Now you can see that this resulting zygote will have small h from the female and capital H from the male. So its genotype will be small h, capital H. This is its genotype. And if this is the genotype, then what will happen? Just think about it. Something like this will happen. Since the capital H is dominating, so the child will have black hair, right? So this is how the hair color of the child is decided. Let's consider some more cases. Now let's see if these two reproduce, what will be the hair color of their children. Okay. So for this, first of all, we should know the genotypes of these two. Suppose the male genotype is HH, okay, and that of the female is capital H, small h. It might happen. Though this has both the genes, but capital H will be the dominating one, and for this, the hair color of the lady is black. Now, what will happen during reproduction? One sex cell from the female and one sex cell from the male will come. These two sex cells will fuse to make a new cell, as always, the zygote, okay, which will grow into a child. Now see, this male has two genes, but only one out of these will come, and since both are of the same type, so there is no doubt that it will be H. But here, the female has two genes, capital H and small h. So which out of these two will come? This cannot be ascertained for sure. It might happen that this one might come or this one might come. Okay, let us assume that small h comes out. Let's assume it's the small h. Now what will happen in this case? Small h is coming from both the sides. So the genotype of the zygote will be 2 small h. So what type of hair will the child have? Blonde. You must have understood. But you must be thinking that there's possibility of another case too. What case is possible here? I will show. 1 sex cells are coming from each of them. From male it will surely be small h, but sex cell from the female can also be capital H. If it is capital H, then what will happen? When these two will fuse into make a zygote, then there will be one capital H and one small h. Now, what will be the type of hair of the child then? It will be like this, black, right? That means when these two will reproduce, then their children might have white colored hair or even black colored hair. Very interesting. But when these two reproduce, then you see the hair will always be black. This lady has white hair, blonde hair, but that of her child will always be black. Why? Because from here it will always be capital H from the male, and from the female it will always be small h. And these two together will always make this genotype only, and this capital H will always dominate, and thus it will always be black hair. I am sure you must be enjoying this, so let's see one more final case. This is a very interesting case. This is a male and this is a female. Together they reproduce. This has genotype capital H, small h, okay, due to which the color of his hair is black and the genotype of the lady is also the same, okay. Now see, during reproduction, one sex cell will come from each of them, and these two together will form a zygote, which will develop into a child. Okay, now see, the gene from the female has two options, capital H and small h, and the gene from the male also has two options, capital H and small h. So here we have 4 possibilities in total. Let me make all the 4 possibilities. Now suppose in the first case we get capital H from the lady. Okay, and even from the male we get capital H. In the second case, suppose we get capital H from the lady, but from the male comes small h, okay. So it's a bit different scene. In the third case, we have small h from the female and capital H from the male. And in the fourth case, small h comes from both the lady and the male, okay. So these can be the 4 options. You verify what will happen in this case. The zygote is capital H, in this case capital H, small h, in this one small h, capital H, and in this HH, okay. Now in all these 4 probable cases, what will be the hair color of the child that grows? See, here capital H, that means black. It will be black color. In this case, there's one capital H that will dominate and the color is black. In this, there's one capital H which will dominate and give black color. And see here, in this, both are small h. That means, what will happen here? Blonde. So you see, these kinds of children might be born. You only concentrate on the hair color, not on the other things, because here we are discussing only hair color. Black, and this one is blonde, okay. Though both the parents had what type of hair? Black. But it might happen that the child's hair color is not black. What's the reason of this? Both the male and the female must have had blonde hair genes somewhere, right? Both had blonde color hair genes, okay. So when the right combination is made, the child might have blonde hair. So these things are actually very interesting, and biology itself has a special branch in which we study about genes in greater detail, and the name of that branch is genetics. Here in this chapter we will just see a bit. If you study biology in higher classes, then you will study all these things in greater details.